Daniel, great to see you, man.
Hey, Sam, how are you?
I'm great. All right. Lately, on several conversations that we've had and even clients we've started with, it's been people that maybe they've been a director for 5 years, maybe 10 years, maybe even 15, but they want some knowledge and they want somebody to do a deep dive on their systems, on their fundraising systems, their main accounting system, their accounts payable system. And then maybe they've had somebody in that finance role for several years, maybe even over a decade, and maybe they're not up to the way technology can move today, or maybe they're not sure exactly what roles they need with their office and how their administrative staff is staffed or their leadership team. So I think going into today's podcast, we thought if a number of people have asked these questions or described these situations, maybe it could be helpful for people that do listen to this podcast to be a resource.
In some cases, there's some pain points happening. There's some recognition that maybe there's duplication of efforts or that things are not streamlined the way they ought to be. But the directors know that they need help. Their administrative staff might be overwhelmed or things just don't seem to be clicking smoothly. And they know they need some help. And so they end up talking to us and saying, hey, we need some help, but we're not sure exactly what we even need or how you guys can help us. And so we've been able to do some assessment on several different clients. This is not just one client. We're not talking about a specific client. This is something that we've seen multiple times now, where someone comes and says they want some sort of additional help, but they first need just an assessment of their overall systems to even know where is going to make the most impact, like how someone can come alongside and even support them, because they don't have the clarity enough of their own systems to even know what's going to be the biggest help.
So what do you think today? Like, what are the 2 or 3 big pillars of this that we should probably cover?
Technology constantly changes. And so whether you like it or not, a lot your software is going to be upgrading on the back end, or you get kind of left behind if you're using an old legacy system that's not updating. Your vendors, their requirements are changing. Sometimes your bank is updating a website, their own website or something, creates changes. So there's changes going on. And if your processes are not evolving to keep up with that, it creates issues. So the technology is one piece. And then just overall your systems or workflow, how the information moves is another key kind of factor. And then the last thing, I guess, is just personnel and the roles that you have involved. A lot of times nonprofits, folks are wearing multiple hats, but then when somebody leaves or retires or there's some sort of change on the staffing side, sometimes those tasks and those roles get moved to the available person, whether or not that makes sense in the long run. And so you end up with systems that are sometimes kind of convoluted as far as like the combination of tasks that someone is doing don't necessarily make sense anymore. It just happened to be that they were available when when the need came up to handle it.
So you want to start with technology and systems?
Yeah, I think technology is a great place to start, because your underlying accounting software, your donation software, those things are key pieces of your overall system. And a lot of times they impact even the capabilities or the workflow process that's even possible. And so, the accounting software, a lot of our clients are just using QuickBooks Online, which, traditionally years ago was not that good, but these days it's improved a lot. And so it's still not perfect. You have plenty of issues with any software. You're going to have things that you like or don't like, but it's capable of supporting a lot more activity and transactions and customization than it used to. And so you have folks that are still sometimes using a desktop version of QuickBooks, or they're using another kind of legacy software that's more desktop-based or server-based. And that limits the way that your workflow can go, because if it's limited to somebody sitting at the desk or limited to the capabilities of software 20 years ago, there's not as much streamlining that you can do on the technology side. And so a lot of people know that, and they look to the software as the issue, and it might be a key part, but it's not going to solve all your issues overnight, because if you just upgrade the software and you don't look at all the other systems and things, and you try to just keep doing the same processes with new software, you're not going to get the impact from upgrading that you wanted. So it's a key piece, but it's not a panacea on its own.
So how, for somebody listening to this with their technology, what maybe would they ask themselves, or what would they think about if they felt if maybe there was a better option for them?
You want to start with the end in mind, as far as what are the outputs that you need from the system? What kind of reports? What is the board looking at? Like, what are the compliance requirements, as far as you need something that's going to support, being able to produce your information for your tax return for your 990. You need to be able to pull out information for your auditors. You kind of have to think with the end in mind first, and then work backwards into software that's going to support that. A lot of times there's requirements if people have separate entities, then that creates some requirements over what software you can use or not use, depending on whether the software is going to support that or not. So you kind of have to start with the end result and then work backwards and make sure that the software you're choosing supports what you need it to do.
So what are some of the top options that you've seen so far?
So I mentioned QuickBooks Online already. The next step up from there is software like Blackbaud's Financial Edge. You have Sage Intacct, and then you go to even larger software, something like NetSuite. Most, nonprofits are not large enough where they necessarily need like a multi-state, multi-location type software, like something like NetSuite would support. And really, I think that QuickBooks has narrowed the gap some between what they used to be for very small organizations, and they weren't as good for, as organizations grew. But they've narrowed that gap some between them and some of the larger ones like Sage Intacct.
Anything else on technology or systems here that is important?
Yeah, I guess just one other comment. A lot of people, AI is a hot topic these days, and I think that the AI is not going to solve things on its own, but a lot of times your software vendors are building in capabilities to the software based on some of the AI tools in the background. And so you're going to see improvement within the software if you're using the latest versions of the software, and you're not going to get those capabilities if you're still using like a legacy version, a desktop version of the software, the same way that software engineers are building into the upgrades and things that are being released if you're on a cloud version of something.
You mean a desktop version of something?
Yeah, like the AI capabilities and the features that's enabling are getting built into releases that happen on the cloud-based versions of the software, but they're not going back and retroactively, adding those to like desktop versions or things. And so I think that the gap between the capabilities of a desktop software legacy kind of system and what's out there in the market now is going to continue to increase as the software teams build in AI tools and features into the new releases.
And I guess, is that why they're discontinuing desktop version, because there's really no ways to update it and continue to evolve the technology versus like a more heavier re-release where once it's in the cloud, like QuickBooks Online or something like that, there's constant iterations that can happen.
Right, and that's definitely part of it. I mean, you could argue that the other part is like the software companies want to get you on a subscription so that they can constantly increase the price and keep getting paid, versus the desktop versions that they used to release where you pay one time and then you might keep it for several years and not upgrade every year. And with the online versions, you're forced into that subscription model. So part of it is their financial motivation, but the other part is what you mentioned, is that they have a lot more capability to continue to fix bugs and add new features if it's on the cloud, and they have more control then over the features and ability to push out new releases.
What about workflow? What's on your mind there?
So I think with workflow, and this is kind of related to the people side too. I'm not sure if you can really look at those two things separately, but essentially it's helpful to take a step back or to bring someone in from the outside, like we've done several times for people who are not in the thick of it, who can see the sort of be a little bit more objective on things. It doesn't have to be somebody from outside if you can just hit pause and kind of step back and revisit the overall picture. But thinking through how funds come in, how receipts go out, how payments go out, how payrolls run, basically it boils down to, in my view, it boils down to money comes in and money goes out. And what are the steps then to make those things happen? And, oftentimes there's multiple ways that money comes in. It might come in by check. It might come in by a donation online. And each of those different ways that money's coming in requires a different system or a different set of steps. And then similarly, when money's going out, there's your standard payable process. There's money's going out with the payroll system. Money might be going out by ACH. It might be going out by physical checks. And there's different steps to that process. And so just kind of taking a step back to see okay, what are the steps that we're going through? And are all of these steps really necessary? Is there a reason for this step? Are we recording this in an Excel sheet over here because somebody actually uses it? Or was that just something that someone years ago used and nobody even looks at that anymore? And at this point, we're just typing a number in to type a number in. And so when you take a step back and you look at the steps that you're going through in some of that process and sort of ask, why are we doing this? Who's using this output? It can identify sometimes either duplication, where multiple people are doing the same thing and don't realize that someone else is already doing that, or just inefficiencies.
Sometimes too, if people are leaning on existing staff in-house, but that in-house, maybe they don't have experience in the bigger picture, or maybe they've been there a while and they don't really understand what's out there, then the director is going to be constrained to the experience and the knowledge of internal staff.
Certainly, it's a little bit harder for someone who's been doing something the same way every day for years to think about a new way to do that. Sometimes it does take somebody from outside to have that objectivity to recognize. Like someone coming in from outside, sometimes you go through that process and you say, yes, this step is necessary. It is getting used over here. It's not something maybe that every organization needs, but it is something that we're using. And so it's not that all those steps are unnecessary. It's just trying to have someone with enough perspective to have sort of a fresh set of eyes and see things, the possibility of what things could be, or things that might be unusual that just may be unnecessary.
With the workflow piece here, can you lay out maybe where you've seen a good example with the client and what they put in place?
I've traditionally, I guess my background is more what I would call incremental improvement, where you don't come in and change everything at one time, but you take a look at a system or a process and you might upgrade one area at a time. And sometimes you have to, things are interrelated and you have to upgrade software and processes at the same time, but other times you can sort of do things incrementally. And so, for example, like one client right now, I'm working on upgrading their payment process to more of a electronic ACH process, going through evaluating a couple different tools to see what's going to be the best fit for that organization, that culture. And once we've identified that tool, then it'll be a process of rolling it out and updating that process. And so just seeing someone who, in this case, like things are not bad, but there's some pain points with checks getting lost in the mail and vendors not getting paid because checks are in the mail. And so there's the desire to upgrade that to a more modern, payment process. And so just working with them to go through some of that evaluation of their needs and then which tool might be the best fit for their situation.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, what are you trying to look for to understand what's best, or why is it even worth it versus what's a waste of time?
You don't want to switch out one system for another one and end up with a different set of problems. And so part of it is when you're thinking through the new system to try to figure out, is this going to introduce a different set of issues? And maybe we solve one thing, but we create two other problems instead. And so, for example, with updating this to ACH, then you have to think through, okay, well, how are we going to make sure that these are getting approved still? And there's tools out there to document those approvals, but if you're not signing checks anymore and previously your internal control was someone is signing a check and that's the approval for that expense, then you have to make sure, okay, when we're updating this process, let's not introduce a fraud risk here by making somebody single-handedly authorized to send out all these payments without any oversight. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but just trying to think through what the goal is and what you're trying to solve without creating new issues at the same time.
Anything else there on workflow?
Just, I guess one other comment is that a lot of times with nonprofits and administration, there's a lot of interface between the development side and the accounting side, and those two groups have different needs. The accountants are more focused on the funds that were received, if there's any designation to those funds, making sure that the donor designations are honored. The fundraising folks are a lot more focused on how the funds are raised, what channel it came from. Was a donor responding to an online ad? Were they responding to a piece of mail? Was this a personal contact someone had? And so sometimes they need different pieces of information from each other. And if you're trying to get all of that information from the accounting side, the development folks are going to be frustrated, and vice versa. If you're trying to run all your donation information through CRM, through the donation software, then the accountants are not getting what they need. So you have to have a process to sort of reconcile those two systems and make sure that you're pulling the reports with the detail that you need for both sides.
Got it. Okay, what about personnel? What about that piece?
So I mentioned personnel as part of the system because, these tasks are not happening on their own. You have people involved, and when people are involved, then things get fun real quick sometimes because you have people that are used to doing things a certain way, and some people like change and they like new technology and they want to implement every new tool they see, and then other people would rather keep doing the things the same way that they've done them, and they'd rather keep doing paper-based process and something that may not be serving the organization anymore, but it's what they know and they're comfortable with and familiar with. And so through any kind of system updates, you have to take that into account and what changes the organization is going to be able to support at a kind of cultural level, at the people level. One piece of software, it might be a perfect piece of software, but if you don't have the staff to implement it and run it, then it's not the perfect software for you. And you might choose a different software that might have a few less capabilities, but it's easier for your staff to use and implement. And so just being aware of the people side and to know the capabilities of the staff, and to know in some cases, depending how the system updates, you might free up somebody's time significantly from one area, and then what are you going to ask them to do instead? How are you going to retrain them maybe, or are there personnel changes that need to happen, which is sometimes a hard conversation as well, depending how you're updating things, how the system's updating, where the organization's moving.
And I guess what you're saying is ultimately having somebody that really wants to see that change happen.
You definitely need the leadership of the organization to buy in and to be willing to require the change, because if you don't have that kind of buy-in at the top, then there's not really any incentive for the people working in the organization to go through the pain of changing a process and learning something new if they don't have the buy-in from the top.
What else about personnel?
You have a lot of insight, I think, into people's personality and leadership styles. So I just wonder on your side what you've seen as far as some of the operators who are stronger and are able to drive change versus maybe people that would just rather let things coast along and respond more to fires and putting out urgent things instead of being proactive. Do you see differences, I guess, or can you highlight some of those things that people do handle those differently?
Like the executive directors?
Right. Some of the leadership, when they're willing to make the change versus, they know that something might be wrong, but they're not willing to actually go and make a change.
I think that you need people to execute their job. execute their responsibilities. But then you need, leadership to see the bigger picture and then to drive that change. But I also think that if you find the right people, they'll own that change. And so what I see with our clients is, I'd say it's a much smaller percentage, 20, 30% of clients, but they'll drive change. And then maybe you have people that are less quote unquote driven, but they'll still empower people and they'll get the organization there to where it needs to go. It just might not be as big as fast. And then I feel like you have certain leaders that are just scared. They're scared of their own people. They're scared to make mistakes. They're not confident in a vision and how to build alignment with their board. And so I think those types of situations, ultimately, I think sometimes the directors even can get told what to do by their own staff at times. And I don't think that's very helpful. So, I mean, it's a tough thing. I know if you're in the nonprofit world, you're making less money maybe than for-profit, but still, I mean, there are people out there that are passionate and willing to do it. And I think it's about culture. And I also think, to the last example, on the directors that are probably not as good of leaders as they could be, from my perception, sometimes they have staff that just fight it. They fight the unknown. They fight what could be. They don't know technology really that well. And so it's kind of a roadblock. And then you really, to your point earlier, you really need the director to push through that. And then, and to ultimately, and the beautiful thing about what we get to do, we get to see a lot of different examples. So we're not usually proposing something that hasn't already been done before.
And I think your point there about sometimes the director may not necessarily be the ones that are personally driving the change, but they may empower someone else in the organization to let that person drive the change. And if everyone knows that person has the leader's support, the leader may or may not be actually the one driving the whole process forward, but they've empowered the staff or the folks that are driving the change in order to get that updated, get that system updated or get that process updated or get the software change or whatever it might be.
Cool. You got anything else?
I guess that's all for now.
Okay. So thanks for listening, everybody. Hopefully this is helpful if this topic interests you. And as always, if you want to reach out and talk about anything, just cfoleverage.com. Thanks so much, and have a great rest of the day.
Hey everyone, this is your co-host, Daniel Weaver, and I'm the managing partner with CFO Leverage. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Maximize Your Impact podcast by CFO Leverage. If you've enjoyed this episode, would you share this with a friend or leave us a review on your podcast platform? If you have questions about what you've heard or want help creating a solid administrative and financial foundation at your nonprofit, we want to hear from you. Please contact Sam Coates or myself on our website, www.cfoleverage.com. That's www.cfoleverage.com. Have a great day and go maximize your impact.